I figure since I'm the only one that can actually see this right now, we'll go ahead and start with Gardy in Ottawa, Canada. And it says here, according to the screener, it's necessary to have certain rules. Some people need a God to define these rules. Some don't. I'm not quite sure. Did you have a question, or was that just the statement you wanted to make?
That's, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Yes, that was an introductory statement. So basically, I just wanted to start by saying that I am the ultimate atheist myself, and I do not, from the subatomic particles to society, to me, it's all emergent properties from the bottom all the way up. And at each level, you would have certain rules, you would have certain methods that would allow a system to work. So basically, we're just gears in a system, and I'm materialist all the way through. Now, so basically, I was actually looking at believers a little bit, just saying, how can they believe this shit? How would they believe this God thing and everything like that? And I started to think myself, given that everything is just an emergent property, the fact that I have love for my wife and my kids, the fact that I have certain things that I would not do, these arguably would be emergent properties as well, and can be as true or as untrue as a belief in God.
So I fully acknowledge that there are things that we would identify as emergent properties, but I wouldn't go so far as to say everything is an emergent property. But I'm not quite sure.
I would say okay, sorry, go ahead.
I'm just not quite sure because it seemed like from what the call screener typed in that you're essentially saying some people need a God to define rules. Well, first of all, that would imply that there is a God defining the rules, because as far as I can tell, what's happening is that human beings are defining the rules and claiming that they come from a God. And so all we're really saying is some humans prefer rules being handed to them by somebody rather than discovering or thinking about them themselves.
Correct. But again, I'm just looking at what is true, what as an atheist, some things to me are true, such as, the love I have for my wife and for my kids. This is very true, and to me, it's like a tangible thing. But in fact, it's not. It's just it's something that's in my brain, and if you push it really hard, one could say that it's not even true. It doesn't really exist. It's just a state within my brain.
Sure, but that's different from.
And I was going to say, just because it's in your brain doesn't make it untrue. Everything that we experience is filtered through that lens, and is in some ways reactions to, chemical stimuli or whatever it is. It doesn't mean that it's less true. And I think you're kind of mixing terms a little bit of what's true versus what's material. And that having been said, there's certainly things that we can do to look at brain chemistry when people are experiencing certain emotions, and so that doesn't separate it completely out from the physical realm either. And so I'm probably, I don't want to speak for Matt, but I think I'm probably as confused as you are about what your point is exactly. So,
I mean, if it's just that religions have utility.
The essence of my point was that I was looking at believers, and I was saying, what are they thinking about when I myself have certain beliefs and wants and needs that are arguably not true either. And I guess we all have something that we believe in, and something that we want, and some people get it from God. I don't, but so some people do, and it kind of made me a little bit made me think that, well, maybe I'm not that altogether, maybe I don't have a full understanding of the whole thing, because maybe I don't have.
So I would just add that I don't think that what you're describing here is that some people have similar emotional reactions that those of us that don't believe in God. So you're saying your emotional reaction, the way that your brain chemistry changes as a result of your love for your wife, for example, or standing in front of a beautiful vista. People experience similar changes in brain chemistry and similar experiences through their perception or their belief in God. I don't think that's a controversial position. I think that that's exactly what a lot of folks will say is, how they feel when they're thinking about God. It doesn't have anything to do with whether or not God exists. It certainly just is something to do with our emotional connection to perceptions. It doesn't have any bearing on whether or not it's true, but I also don't think it has any negative bearing on whether or not your love of your wife or your other loved ones is any less true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, religions have utility in the sense that they provide some structure. However, if I say I love my wife or I love my girlfriend, I'm talking about a real experience that I'm having and potentially sharing with another real person.
Right.
And that's a little different from saying there's somebody who's timeless, spaceless, loves me, wants to impose justice, created everything, and really doesn't want me to have sex with a dude.
Or eat shellfish. Don't forget that.
Yeah, selfish. I mean, they're slightly different. There is something there. The thing I was concerned about when I first read the call screener's note is that I thought you were saying there are some people who need a God or need the perception of a God in order to understand things or be moral, whereas the rest of us don't. And that is an incredibly arrogant and incorrect position to hold. And, I'm not saying you actually hold that, but it's really annoying when atheists, particularly someone like me, who I used to be religious, I believed sincerely, and now I don't. And if I were just to run around, saying, oh, well, I was, suffering from mental illness or an inability to process things, or I was just stupid back then or whatever else. I mean, that's not accurate, but also it would be wrong for me to suggest that there are people out there I don't need religion anymore. I have graduated to a point where I don't need it, but you do. And I want to make sure we kind of squash that notion at all opportunities, because there are people, anybody I would hope is potentially someone who can find their way out of religion. I don't know if Debbie, if you had anything to add before we go on to another one.
I was wondering about the rules part. And I think that's one of the differences here is, believing that your mother doesn't lie to you or that you love your wife and your wife loves you is different than thinking the only reason people can be good is because God gave us rules to follow. So I think the call screener's note had something about rules, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's
correct. And I don't think I stated it right. I think I was thinking of more, emergent properties, and each layer having certain rules and everything like that. But I don't think that I framed it right.
Yeah. All right, Gardy, I appreciate the call. We're going to move on to some other calls right now, but you take care of yourself and, the people around you. Make sure you are staying healthy and following whatever rules are in place in your particular area, and maybe going above and beyond some of that, because we've had, there's weirdness. I saw somebody came in, and is it Kansas where the Supreme Court sided with the governor that the governor is allowed to limit church attendance to 10 people under?
Well, and this was simply a procedural question. The case that was raised. So the way Kansas works is a little strange. Kansas has what's called I think it's a legislative council that can overrule or can oversee the governor's actions on certain executive activities that go on, but empowers only the legislature to overturn executive action. And essentially what happened is the legislature said, we delegate that authority to this legislative council. And the legislative council said, nope, we're not allowing the governor to do this. And the governor went to the Supreme Court of the state and said, hey, wait a second, only the full legislature can overrule my actions. And so you need to put my executive action back into place. So I don't believe it went all the way to the full question of whether or not the governor had the authority to limit religious gatherings. As a sidebar, yes, she does. But in this case, it was strictly, I believe, on the procedural grounds of whether or not the legislative council had the authority to overrule the governor. And on that question, the answer is most certainly no.
And then evidently immediately after this, Texas Governor Greg Abbott decided to go ahead and make an exception so that people could go to church and infect each other today. Are you guys getting reports in all day long from people who are like, look at all these people at the church in my town.
Yeah, we are. Yeah. And a lot of our state, the great thing that we have at American Atheists are just this amazing network of state volunteers, our state directors, and assistant state directors that keep an eye on this sort of thing. And a lot of them are doing the right thing and contacting health officials and saying, hey, there's a gathering of 400 people at this church. They're ignoring the stay-at-home order in a state where there is no exception. Please come do something about it. And unfortunately, too many health departments are worried about the optics of shutting down a large gathering on Easter Sunday, which
Sure.
on the one hand I understand, but on the other hand, when 40 of those 100 people end up infected with the coronavirus and 20 of them end up dead because they're all over 70, I think they're going to not care so much about the optics of enforcing these rules and enforcing a twisted interpretation of the Constitution. The free exercise clause is not a death pact. It is not absolute. The Supreme Court has said for the entire history of the United States, even until now, despite some of the rulings we've seen recently, that the free exercise clause is not universal. That the government can, in fact, put limits on free expression when it has a compelling interest, and that interest right now is preventing millions of people from dying. And that's a pretty compelling interest.
It's funny because we talk about the optics of it. And on the one hand, there's the optics of, hey, we ain't afraid of no virus. Jesus will protect us. Let's go ahead and go to church.
Covered in Jesus' blood.
but the risk then is that if you do that and people wind up sick, now all of a sudden it exposes that perhaps, Jesus doesn't have your back as much. And yet it would seem to me that the optics would be overall good to say, hey, we're going to follow what the health experts and the government are putting in place because, first of all, we can go to that passage that says all governing authorities are appointed by God and you should be obeying them. But also, God is everywhere and Jesus is everywhere. And so we can worship just as well from home as we could getting together. This is not about the truth of the religion or orthodoxy. This is about orthopraxy. This is about people who are convinced that I must go to a particular building on Easter and worship and praise, and God will protect me.
Yeah, and that's the risk right now is the people that are using this both as like a sign of faith, not just in the religion, but also in the kind of the political side of things, where this, I'm infecting all my loved ones with a highly contagious virus to own the libs is kind of the attitude that too many people have right now. And I'd much rather people were listening to medical professionals and what science is saying. And I will say, 95% probably of churches are doing the right thing and have canceled their in-person gatherings. And so, I know that's tough. Like, I don't want to be flippant about this, but I know it's easy for us just to say, well, stay the fuck home and don't spread this disease. I understand. I have some level of empathy for people who are, really feeling the hurt right now and need community and really want to connect with the people that they're closest with, who are oftentimes the people who are part of their congregation. But at the same time, we're all going through a lot of that right now. And so what folks need to do is just do what the health professionals are saying. And that is large gatherings are a really bad idea right now. So please don't do them.
Yeah. It's like there's a dueling, true Christian, I guess, kind of thing going on here where it's, oh no, God will protect me. I'm covered in the blood of Jesus. Our church is safe. And then you have a preacher who says that, this whole thing's a hoax. And then he winds up dying of COVID-19. Right. And so there's no way to win this because all somebody else has to do is say, well, he clearly wasn't a true Christian. It's not his church that's the right church. It's my church that's the right church. And now the church that becomes the right one is the one where the least people got infected, I guess. Yeah. I don't even understand, the mentality. I got an email kind of quasi joke today from an atheist pointing out that Boris Johnson was released from the hospital today as an Easter miracle or something. And I was like, oh man, that's not the way science and diseases work. For us to be running around, hey, you know what? Nobody in American Atheists is sick, and nobody in the Atheist Community of Austin is sick. We win. Well, we do win.
It's a sign. Yeah.
Yeah, we do win, but it's not because there's some divine guidance or protector or punisher out